I'm going to start by welcoming everybody in name of our incredible Break a Sweat Working Board of Directors, our amazing staff, and the volunteers who are incredible, our impact agents. And you have no idea the army of interns that we have of SMART. They happen to all be young women, but we are thrilled to have young men interns as well. And please spread the word on that. We want to thank everybody who's in attendance. Way too many people to name. Incredible people who are incredible humans and also incredible leaders. Many of the people in our central village plaza today with the Women's Fund Central Plaza have been panelists here before. We have a lot of leaders, survivor leaders, and many former board members who have built this organization from day one. So we have to thank the people who support this, the amazing 1 Billion Rising that actually brought me to the Women's Fund originally. We thank them for empowering this entire Impact Collaborative series. And Norma Jean Abraham and Anthony R. Abraham Foundation, thank you for supporting our Freedom from Violence pillar. We love you. Raise the bar. I've got quite a few attorneys here, Makish Jain, and 5 of our board members, illustrious board members, many of them here with us today. Raise the Bar is a signature event that works with the legal community. It's been in the Women's Fund portfolio for many, many years, and we have deltaed it over to January 13th with an indoor-outdoor event. Please join us. The Miami Herald has just announced they're sponsoring, so get your logos on there fast, sponsors. Our grand mission is something you hear me talk about often because I feel it. I don't feel like we ask people really to fundraise so much as just to join and invest in our mission, because this is your Women's Fund. We're all in this together. And so thank you for those who are able to participate. So since data and research are so important and make people focus, especially policymakers, many of them here today, I'm going to ask my wonderful colleague, Viviana, to tell us a little bit about why that is now a Women's Fund program. Take it away, Vivi.
Hello, everybody. It is my pleasure to present you with the first of its kind report in Miami-Dade County, the Women's Fund Landscape of Services Research Report titled Gaps, Synergies, and Needs, Organizational Support for Women and Girls in Miami-Dade County. As some of you know, having participated in our research, this report provides critical information on the challenges and needs of local organizations serving women and girls, allowing the ecosystem to be better understood and a more effective support network to be established. This research was realized by the Women's Fund with funding support from the Women's Impact Initiative of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation to close the gender data inequality gap. It shines a light on what is happening with women and girls in our community, giving us a better understanding of the specific needs and challenges they face and what action steps we need to take to help them. We hope this report serves as a first step so that we may continue to support and elevate these organizations. Thank you.
No, thank you, Viviana. You're a rock star. Amazing. Grateful. I'm paying attention now. Lujane, Dr. Alhaji, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lujane Alhaji, and I'm an assistant professor at UM. I'm a psychiatry attending, and I've been working at University of Miami Thrive Clinic, which is our collaborative care clinic that helps persons who have been trafficked with accessing medical and mental health care. I'll be talking to you today about understanding the neurobiology of trauma. So I have no disclosures to report. Okay, so why are we talking about this? So neuroscience research is now fostering a better understanding on the impact of trauma on individuals who experience it. And this is important because this can help policymakers and also the public understand how the person who's experiencing trauma feels and how understanding trauma can help also inform our existing policies and also protocols to help these survivors. So we've heard about PTSD, right? So post-traumatic stress disorder is basically a collection of different symptom clusters right? So you may hear persons experiencing things like nightmares or flashbacks, avoiding triggers that remind them of the trauma, sometimes having negative mood symptoms such as depression, anxiety, being very quickly startled with small triggers, or having a high fear response. So most people, after experiencing some trauma, have transient symptoms of the ones I just mentioned, right? But only a minority of people end up having debilitating and longer lasting symptoms of PTSD. Okay, so you can think about PTSD as a difficulty to adjust to normal life after they've experienced something traumatic that could have ended up with severe harm to themselves or others, right? And this can depend on a lot of factors. So how come some people develop PTSD and some others don't, right? So this can also depend on prior experiences, belief systems, their interpretation about the trauma, how long the trauma was there for, and how many times did it happen. So what happens to the brain after a trauma? So there's a lot of different components and different anatomical structures in the brain that do get affected after a trauma. And this includes the neocortex, which is the part that's in charge of planning, executing things, judgment, right? The limbic system, which is more in charge of the emotional side. The amygdala, which is the main center for the fear response. And the hippocampus, which is the area that forms memories and helps form memories. So every person is different in terms of how they respond to the trauma, right? In fact, even if you take multiple people who live with PTSD, they might report to you different types of symptoms. And even one individual living with PTSD may have different symptoms occurring on a day-to-day basis. So our brain development is really influenced by the relationships we have with others, right? So if you imagine, if you are someone who has experienced trauma, such as abuse or even neglect in childhood, your brain is going to adapt in a way where you're adapting to a dangerous and unpredictable situation, right? So then when you're going back to your day-to-day life, when there's a non-threatening circumstance, your brain is still adapted to perceive that something threatening is happening, right? So this is the fear response. And a lot of patients and people who live with PTSD then end up avoiding triggers that bring on this fear response. And avoidance can look different. So this can be in terms of isolation, right? Being away from friends and family. This can be in the form of self-medicating, right? Or even self-harm to avoid the emotion and the physical pain that's associated with remembering the trauma. So you may have heard of neurotransmitters and inflammation, right? So inflammation is in vogue in the world of psychiatry. But basically, we've all heard of the flight or fight response, right? What people usually forget is the freeze response, right? So when someone is faced with a dangerous situation, there are different survival responses and every person is different. But what we do know is that the body basically redistributes the blood and oxygen to the areas that are crucial to fight off this threat and to survive the situation, and takes it away from areas that are not important, right? In this time, the body also releases a lot of stress hormones, such as cortisol, and that influences how the person responds to the situation: flight, fight, or freeze, okay? Now, for someone living with PTSD, right, this stress response is heightened and continues for a longer period of time, even after the threat has been removed. Now, I've heard this over and over from providers, from law enforcement officers, different people, and they say, this person can't get their story right. They're not giving me details. Every time I speak with them, they give me a different story. I don't know if this person is reliable. Well, that's not true, right? When someone is facing a threatening situation, it is very difficult to concentrate on the little details and pay attention to other things that are happening because they are focused on surviving. So asking a person what time of day it was, what the person was wearing, what the person even looked like may not be that obvious and may be very difficult to remember for the person who's experiencing the trauma, right? So we might expect and would want an ideal, organized, linear story of the traumatic experience, but actually this is very difficult to achieve. The other thing that can happen for persons who've experienced trauma is that negative memories can become much more prominent and obvious than the positive ones. And the little details associated with day-to-day life and positive memories can be very difficult to recall. The other thing that can happen is every time the person is triggered, right, the memory comes back. And every time the memory comes back, it gets encoded again in the brain, right? So the memory becomes stronger, okay? And if you can imagine, if someone's memory is stronger of the traumatic experience, this can also bring up the negative feelings that are associated with the trauma, the feelings of anxiety, the guilt, the shame, the self-blame that can be associated with remembering the trauma. So we've heard about genetics, right? So our genes, what we inherit from our families. And there's also epigenetics. So those are the environmental exposures that can influence how a gene is expressed. So it's not the gene itself, but they're the mechanics that control the gene expressions, right? And we know that from early childhood experiences and early trauma, especially, that a person can be more vulnerable to have a more prolonged and also severe stress response in unpredictable new circumstances. So something that is not threatening for someone without a trauma. So for example, a child moving or a child moving to a new school or meeting new peers can be perceived as something that is threatening and scary, okay? And it can also condition the body to be stressed more easily, where this fear response that we talked about earlier gets activated much quicker and lasts longer. Now, I didn't go into all the details of the neurobiology of trauma, but obviously we know that there are other factors. So genetics, right? So we may have heard of, transgenerational trauma, trauma that's inherited from families and parents. Changes in sleep and the sleep-wake cycle can also influence the neurobiology of trauma. We've learned about inflammation, especially in the most recent years. We know that people who've experienced repetitive trauma may develop something called complex trauma or complex PTSD that might look different from someone who's experienced one traumatic experience, right? We know that, again, we can't compare someone who has PTSD only to someone who has PTSD, substance use, and major depressive disorder and medical issues, right? So the picture can look also more complex from a person to person, from person to person. So in terms of what we can do as providers, we need to take a step back and better understand the impact of trauma on the brain, right? A person with a history of trauma is doing their best to really survive and to go on from their day-to-day and to be able to function. So just like the brain adapted to the trauma, what we know is that the brain can then readapt, right? To a more positive response, to learn how to trust people, to be able to enjoy life, to be able to live without the anxiety. And this can be done by slowly building trust, by strengthening support systems, by trying to lower stress and taking control of things that may bring on triggers, right? And also empowering the person to be able to speak up to get the help that they need. Now, for me as a mental health provider, I vouch for trauma-informed care, which I know some of our speakers will talk about later, right? And I believe that that should be done with every person that we encounter, because we don't know if someone has a history of trauma. And because of their avoidance, they might not want to talk about their trauma. So it's best to just approach the situation from a trauma-informed way. The other thing that I want to touch on is the therapies with mental health. There's a lot of new and exciting therapies, whether it's with psychopharmacology, with medications, or different kinds of psychotherapies that have proven to help patients with PTSD and to retell the story of their trauma, where with time, it no longer becomes threatening, okay? And obviously, the different kinds of treatments need to be tailored on a person-to-person basis. I want to thank you all for your attention, and I really appreciate this opportunity for me to speak to you all. Thank you so much.
Making it so accessible and so real. That's what your Women's Fund is about. We encourage each and every one of you to remember that we can always learn more. My neural pathways, I am building them as I listen to each and all today. We can all do the same. Please say hello in the chat and know that this is your Impact Collaborative. We want to hear from you. Please participate. The polls that Viviana will be showing to you all really help us to understand where we are, and data is important. Viviana said that earlier. If we're going to improve and keep this to be a living, breathing Impact Collaborative, we need you all to please participate. So this is all yours. I'm going to say that it's a super honor to welcome author Makisha Jane Walker as our first panelist. We usually say 2 minutes or less for the self-introductions, but Makisha is going to take 4 or 5 because she's got a little story that she's wanting to share. All yours, Makisha.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Makisha Jane Walker. I am from Houston. I am a criminal trial attorney. I was formerly a prosecutor, worked for the Harris County District Attorney's Office in Houston, which is the 3rd largest county in the United States. So as you can imagine, we saw a lot of crime. I was, especially during my tenure, I worked there almost 5 years, and I've been an attorney almost 20. During my tenure at the office, I was especially assigned to a division that was then called the Family Criminal Law Division. And that was a division of the DA's office where cases would get sent when the complaining witness or victim would recant. The story had that when the prosecutor would reach out to her, and I say her because most of the time it is, the story would be different than what was originally related on the scene, or they just said that, they didn't want to prosecute the case for whatever reason. They weren't denying that it happened, but they just didn't want to go forward. So that division was staffed with caseworkers, social workers, investigators, and DAs. And I can remember being very frustrated with the women because I felt like I cared about their safety more than they did, and just not understanding why they would allow themselves to be in that situation over and over and over. And I would try the cases and became very good at them. I never lost a family violence case, and but I was still very frustrated. And it took me being involved in a domestic violence relationship to fully understand and grasp what they were going through. And that's despite all the training I had received as a prosecutor and everything that I had access to, knowledge about domestic violence and why, the abuse happens and the cycle of violence and all of that. I still didn't get it. And it wasn't because I didn't want to. It's so conceptually hard to grasp why someone doesn't pack their bags and walk out the front door the first time they get their ass beat. So I ultimately, early in my career at the DA's office, met my ex-husband. He was a police officer and later became an elected official. And initially in our relationship, he showed me the person that he wanted to see, not who he really was. And that's the person I fell in love with. And so when there was certain things that I should have identified as red flags, I excused that behavior because it wasn't him. The person that I knew to be him, the person that I fell in love with. And I would rationalize the red flag away by saying he had a horrible childhood. His mom died when he was little. He never knew his dad, all the issues that he had. And I thought, well, he just needs to see what love is. And if I can just show him love, then, everything's going to be fine. And gradually after we got married, the verbal abuse transitioned into physical and escalated ultimately to a point where I 100% believed that I was going to die, and it was just a matter of when. Numerous incidents where his gun that he carried as a police officer to protect and serve the community was chambered and held against my head, and I was made to beg for my life. I got to a point mentally where I didn't believe there was any way out. I believed wherever I went, he would find me, and that there was nothing I could do except stay and try to survive. He had threatened to kill my mom, my sisters if I left. And I kind of thought, well, this is my bed. I'm not going to bring other people into it. And despite having, 2 sisters that I'm very close to and parents that I'm very close to, I never told anyone. He told me, he said, no one will believe you. You walk into that courthouse every single day and you never tell anyone. So if you try to divorce me and then say all of a sudden you've been abused, you have no proof. And I had started journaling, and it was something that I knew that I had to keep secret. So I just literally wrote down thoughts on a yellow pad, ripped the pages off, put them in my office where he didn't have access to them. And they were in a folder that said, to my sister, if you're reading this, it means I'm dead. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you these things while I was alive. And it continued to escalate. There was an incident where he bit my face and then left the house, and he would always leave and then call to make sure like the coast was clear before he came back. And I gradually, because of him telling me, for years that no one would believe me, I gradually began collecting evidence. And it wasn't anything that I intended to use against him because I was way too scared for that. It was evidence to show people what happened after I was dead and the truth. Versus the truth that he was going to spin after I was gone. And that day, after he bit my face and left and called me on the phone, he was telling me, he was admitting that he had done it on the phone. And I'm like, just no one is ever going to believe this. So I got a handheld cassette recorder and I held it up to the phone. And recorded the conversation. And, I told him, you bit my face. And he said, yeah, I'm going to bite your trachea out of your throat.
Oh,
and, I tried to, these were things that if I told someone, he said he was going to bite my trachea out of my throat, it's just not believable. Who says that? And the perception of the person that he put on to be in public, the police officer, the elected official, the, law school graduate, and divorces get ugly. So I began to continue to collect evidence that I believed was going to capture evidence of my death. Ultimately, I had a nanny cam in our bedroom, and I believed that video would capture my murder. Things escalated to the point one night where he assaulted me in public, and I had to be transported to the hospital and get 100 staples and stitches in my head. I had a gash that went from here all the way over here, and you could see my skull bone. And so at that point, the police were called, I was transported by ambulance, and things were set in motion that I couldn't undo. And I didn't cooperate with the police at the hospital. He fled the scene, wasn't at the hospital. I was afraid to talk to the police. And so then, of course, the next day it gets referred to a detective, and the division chief at the DA's office, who used to be my boss, is calling me, and I'm not wanting to talk to her. And ultimately, the police involvement is what allowed me to break free. And I do not believe that if things hadn't happened the way that they did, that I would have gotten out of the relationship alive. So the book that I wrote is interactive, and it has all this documentation on my website of audio recordings and videos and photographs, 911 calls, and just things to, help people that, maybe have been victims understand, but also help people that haven't been victims understand as well. Because it's different to hear some of the things than it is for someone to tell you about what happens. And, I can say that I've always been a very, very strong person, and anyone that's ever known me from middle school to now will tell you that they never once imagined that I would have been involved in a domestic violence relationship, because I am so strong. And so I also wanted to try to quash that societal misconception that domestic violence only happens to weak, people that have no education. It crosses all societal lines, and it happens to everyone, not just people who live in trailers, So I hope that my story and telling the most deep, dark secrets of my relationship helps someone. And if it helps even one person, then it's worth everything that I had to put out there.
Amazing, amazing, Makisha. There's a huge community, this Central Plaza, this Village Plaza, who is so with you, and gratitude from so many different angles. You can feel it. You have many colleagues here in the legal side of things, amazing service providers. You have leader survivor champions here with you, and regular human beings like me. And we all thank you for your voice,
Thank you.
We have incredible professionals in our community. Yvonne Mesa, 2 minutes is not enough, but we all know how to find you because you are one of the great leaders in our community. So please, board member of the Women's Fund Miami-Dade, take it away, Yvonne.
Hey, so good morning to all of you. It's such a wonderful opportunity to be here listening to these wonderful ladies, leaders, survivors. I mean, really so encouraging to know that we have such strong leaders and survivors. So my name is Yvonne Mesa, and I have the privilege of working for Miami-Dade County for the Community Action and Human Services Department as a bureau chief. And as the bureau chief of the Targeted Services Bureau, I have the opportunity to supervise the Violence Prevention and Intervention Division, that is the umbrella division that operates all of our domestic violence, violence against women, and violence programs for the county. And in doing so, we have a variety of programs. We have the shelters, emergency shelter, and we have transitional housing. These are housing programs where we house victims for up to 2 years. We also have a variety of other non-residential programs, such as the Family Justice Center, which here in Miami-Dade County is a one-stop center called the Coordinated Victims Assistance Center. We have a human trafficking unit. We have domestic violence intake units, which are co-located in the different courthouses in Miami-Dade County. So really, we have a lot of services that are all put together under one division, and that are really here for victims, survivors of crime in general. And so I also have, as Maria mentioned, the privilege of being a board member of the Women's Fund. And in that capacity, I really enjoy the work that we're doing. I really have to say kudos to Maria and to our wonderful board for all the innovative and all the passionate work that is taking place as part of our board. So today we're going to talk about trauma, which is something, Myra, that I feel very much connected to, particularly as being a county employee and understanding that sometimes traditional ways of doing things may prevail for lack of understanding of what really needs to happen as we evolve, as we learn, as we discover things. We need to adjust our operations. And so one of the things that I like to say immediately is the fact that we used to think of trauma as something that was abnormal, something that would only happen to a few people here and there. Now we know, as reported by the National Council on Behavioral Health, that 70% of adults in the United States will most likely experience traumatic events in their lifetime. So we're talking about, again, 70% of adults in the United States. So that tells you right there that we all need to know about trauma. Trauma is not something that cannot be conquered. It's not something that it could potentially become a disorder if not addressed correctly. And that's the key. We need to address it correctly so that it doesn't become something else, and so that we can fully recuperate from those traumatic events that all of us can experience at any time. So when it comes to trauma, we really need to abandon the one size does not fit all. I mean, we have to adhere and embrace the concept that that what works for one person may not work for another one. And so we need to understand that every human being is different. And that's why neuroscience is so important, because neuroscience looks at autonomy. It looks at biology. It looks at your nervous system. It looks at the entire human being, and it tries to connect the dots. And instead of just looking at certain thing, for example, looking at the mental health, but not looking at the physical health, or or vice versa. We now know that if we really want to impact, impact the field of trauma, we need to be more holistic, and we need to have an approach that is more comprehensive, so that we can actually be multidisciplinary in the way that we approach crime. With regard to that, I know I have the opportunity, Maria, and our guest today, to look at trauma very closely and to understand the impact that it has on a human being. As it was being said before, it could be different, and sometimes one of the biggest issue that I see is that it is misunderstood, and that fact makes the entire difference for that victim, because we become, sometimes traditional systems become antagonistic to the victim, or perceive the victim as being antagonistic and not cooperative, when in fact what's happening is that that human being is traumatized. So if we don't look at it from that perspective, we're not going to succeed. So I have several experiences and things that I like to talk to you a little bit more about. So I'll wait for the second round, and then I'll share more with you, Maria.
Brilliant, 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 brilliant. Dr. McGrath, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm actually going to piggyback a lot off what Yvonne just shared. To start, I'm the Director of Programs and Services at Citrus Family Care Network. We are the child welfare lead agency for Miami-Dade Monroe, and I'm also the founder of the Chance program, which is a specialized therapeutic foster care and an in-home therapeutic program for children who have been commercially sexually exploited. One of the reasons I'm so excited about this collaborative today is, over my 20 years of working with children and teens who have experienced significant trauma, the one thing that has always just stood out to me is the negative comments and statements and the really misperceptions that surround the emotional and the behavioral reactions of our traumatized children and teens. A lot like Yvonne said, we hear things that our children and our teens, that they're mistrusting of law enforcement, that they're not cooperative, that their behaviors are so challenging that they can't be in regular foster homes or homes, and they need specialized programs. And my hope today is that through this collaborative and a better understanding of neuroscience, that you'll all start to change your perceptions and reframe your understanding of these behaviors and emotional reactions that are typically seen as very negative, and understand that what you're actually seeing is incredible resilience and survival strategies that these children are using. And that if you actually approach them with a trauma-informed approach and some compassion, that you'll have incredibly different outcomes. And really, just as a community, if we can really spread that word and train others and train our partners, we'll see some significant differences in the lives of our survivors. I have a lot I want to share as well, and I'm going to wait till round two.
Brilliant. I mean, just on that note, we all need to see, every single one of us, no matter what our role is in life, And thank you for keeping on saying that. We're all very, very important. And Shanika, you are one of the people who taught me most about that. We have to be able to see what we're seeing, right? Please welcome Miss Shanika. And again, you can take a little bit longer. No 2 minutes for you. If you want to take 4 or 5, whatever you want, all yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shanika Ampa. I am a nurse currently at the University of Miami Thrive Clinic, but I'm also a founder of a nonprofit called Guiding Light Outreach, Inc. And that nonprofit is really based upon me wanting to be a lighthouse and teaching everybody what it is to be a lighthouse, so people who are in need could find their way to the resources and help that they need. And it stems from being a little girl. And it usually goes back to, why are children not able to find the help? Why are victims, if we didn't say children, but victims not able to find the help? So I speak from my truth. Growing up in Miami-Dade County, being the victim and survivor of human trafficking, I want people to know that we have to provide the resources right out front. When we talk about trauma, as a nurse, I always associated that word to the Writer Trauma Center. I didn't know what trauma was. I didn't find out that I was a survivor of human trafficking until my 30s. I was already a nurse. I did not identify myself as a survivor or victim. And so for me, I can go very professional, but I want to speak to the heart of the people from the community and who you're addressing with the information of being trauma informed. If I don't know what trauma is, because for my whole lifetime, I was taught that these behaviors in these situations were so normal, and the reactions that I'm having to trauma, quote unquote trauma, from a professional standpoint, is me just being afraid or just overreacting. And so I say that because for me, I didn't know that I had trauma. And so I didn't know that my behaviors of fight, flight, or freeze was abnormal. That comes from being sexually abused at 9. How do you then say everything else that happened to me was bad? Everything outside of my household that happened to me was bad. It was more normalized. And so when we as a community, we're here having this conversation, and for service providers, when you don't provide that information in a context where the people you're giving this information to can really understand it. If you go into most of the typical African-American with poverty communities and you say the word trauma, is it not normalized? Are the behaviors and the reactions that they see there not normalized? And so we don't really get to help the people if they don't identify. And so I'm also a person that's very realistic. And when I speak about trauma, I'll tell each person on this line that all of us have a type of trauma. And so we cannot be specific to human trafficking or domestic violence, because I am too also a survivor of domestic violence. But when I speak to a room full of people, I want you to first soul check yourself. What trauma have you gone through? What biases did that trauma cause? And when we talk about trauma-informed care, are we really not just applying a word, but really taking the every day to wake up with a humanistic mind and say, I would treat people well because I don't know what they've been through. That's my perspective of trauma-informed care, from my nurse's perspective, survivor's perspective, and just being a human. If we woke up every day thinking that kid, that woman that we see, very professional, when I'm thinking about Makisha Jane Walker, very professional, but she walks in her office every day and nobody would expect that she has had this trauma because of her presentation. And so we miss it. We miss it all the time. And if we're only looking for the victim to appear very broken and we don't get to understand why their reaction is, we will continue to miss it. And we can continue to have these forums, but when we go back to our communities and your church and your grocery stores and your schools, you won't see it. that's all I'm going to say. I'll go wait for the second round, but I do want us to think about what fight, flight, and freeze means, because as service providers, we have our own numbers. We have our own data that we need to collect in our own work, but we need to understand why they didn't come back. Why did they words attack us when we did nothing but want to offer help? And why they didn't respond, the way we thought they should have responded. And then we can really talk about trauma care. Thank you.
Thank you for empowering each and every one of us to feel like our focus is important. Because everybody here, our focus is important. Makisha, can you give us a couple minutes about sort of, what you're seeing, what you think the key issues are that we need to act on?
Sure. So what I see and have seen as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, the biggest thing is when the victim reports something that doesn't quite make sense or is inconsistent, then that can be used by the defense to say, this doesn't make sense. She's not telling the truth. And a couple of examples I can give you about that. I had a case where a victim called 911 and she had been thrown down the stairs, punched in the head, and punched in the stomach. And when she got on the phone with 911, the only thing she told them was that he stole her purse. And then when the officer got there and started talking to her, like bits and pieces of this started to come out. And it sounded like, the defense attorney in that situation was trying to twist it and say, well, she was angry about this and he was cheating and about what happened. And so she's embellishing these facts, because if they had been true, she would have said that first thing out of the gate. Because if you were thrown down the stairs, punched in the head and punched in the stomach, when you called 911, what's the first thing you're going to say? And so it created a situation where it was hard for her to be believed. And so I think that without an understanding of why these inconsistencies exist, because they're so prevalent, and why someone would call 911 and talk about their purse when they've just been assaulted, without an understanding for that, and I mean, not just in the community, but, in the areas that we practice, we can't adequately help the victims.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Yvonne. Unmute, Yvonne.
So we have already established that there is a general lack of understanding about what trauma means, right? And therefore, what I have seen is that there is a huge misunderstanding about what trauma-informed care means. Indeed, when I ask that question, I get people cannot really put it into words. They sometimes don't know what that really means. So what does it really mean? So I want for everyone to understand that when we're talking about trauma-informed care, what we're really talking about is we're talking about a human being that assumes an individual is most likely to have a history of trauma than not. So that when you are going to have that interaction with that human being, you need to do it from the perspective that trauma may possibly exist in that individual and that trauma has a direct impact in that individual's life. If we don't approach our client, our survivor, our human being, our fellow human being with that mentality, we are missing the point. So then, when it comes to what are the challenges, what are the problems? Why is it that everyone doesn't understand this? I believe that one of the biggest challenges when it comes to this topic is the fact that because of lack of understanding, we are not calling things for what they are. We are missing the point. So, for example, to illustrate it, Mary, I'm going to give a very specific example. So there's this victim that she was stabbed with a kitchen knife multiple times. This individual, as you can imagine, was highly traumatized by this event. So this individual did not address her trauma, and this survivor became very, very traumatized with walking into the kitchen, something as simple as being in the kitchen. But to her, being in the kitchen did not mean just walking into the kitchen, what it means to you and to me. It meant walking into where she was almost killed. So to her, the trauma translated into an inability to walk into the kitchen, which then translated into an inability with regard to adequately feeding her child, because she refused to go into the kitchen. Eating and feeding takes place in the kitchen most of the time. Cooking takes place in the kitchen. So this individual found herself very soon after that being accused of neglect. And a DCF case was open, and so on and so forth. So look at it. This is right here. This is trauma-informed care, or lack thereof. Because of our failure to understand what trauma did to this individual, she ended up with a child, neglect case. So in this particular case, what we had to do for her was to give her occupational therapy. She, as silly as that might sound to some, she needed to learn again, how to walk into that kitchen feeling safe. She did not feel safe walking into that kitchen. So I think that's the biggest issue right here. The fact that we do not understand what it means, the impact that it has, and how that translates into endless situations that are all negative and antagonistic to the victim. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge, Maria, which I think is very, very real, is the fact that when you look from an organizational standpoint, we love to have charts with numbers to demonstrate success. We are data driven. We want to see how many cases we did and how many women got a job during the first trimester, the first quarter of the year. That is what we have been trained to produce, to generate. That's how we define success, by that piece of paper, by that statistical report. So when it comes to trauma-informed care, that does not go well with that. That doesn't go well with that, because often they want to talk about with many of our survivors. So what have you done for this survivor? She has been in the shelter for 3 months. Did she get a job? Did she finish a course? Did she get a certification? No, she saved her life. She's still alive, and that is her success story today. So when it comes to that, that is the issue that we have against us, that we need to figure out a way in which success is individual and can still be measured, but not with the same formula, not in those traditional methods that we have been using, because otherwise we are going to push the numbers and make sure that we have the numbers.
Is it me, or is it Yvonne froze for everybody else, right? So I'm going to say, Yvonne, you froze. I'm just going to say, isn't it amazing that we have these human beings and this heart and this intuition behind our public servants? Oh, there we go.
I'm bored. Okay, hello?
We have you back now, Yvonne. You'd frozen for a minute. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm so sorry. So I was saying that to me, those are the two challenges, Maria. First, the fact that we do not understand the impact, and the fact that we do not understand the connection of that trauma to her performance, and how that entire situation becomes antagonistic to the victim. Second challenge, that we need to look at our operations and make sure that we find a way to measure success, to measure accountability, because trauma-informed care does not always facilitate the traditional method of determining success.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Yes, data is here to serve us, not us to serve it. As far as children are concerned, Dr. McGrath, thank you.
So we've learned so much from the researchers, right, about neuroscience of trauma and processes and what to expect. But I think I have to say, I think we've learned more from our survivors than anyone else. And One of the most important statements I've heard said was years ago. A survivor was on stage, and an audience member asked, you know, when I'm faced with these challenging behaviors and these challenging reactions from a trauma survivor, how do I handle that? And the trauma survivor said, it's not about you. That's how you handle it. It's not about you. Don't personalize it, because it has nothing to do with you. So if you could take a step back, then it will make all the difference in the world. And it's something that, you know, I know we've really tried to bring into our programming and help folks understand it's not about you. So approach the situation differently, approach it in a trauma-informed way. And what does that mean? It means taking a step back and realizing, approach this person with compassion and understanding. I wanted to give some slides. I'm not going to go over every piece of the slide. I just wanted you to have it so that to help put into perspective, how do children and teens react to following trauma? It's very individualized. I think everyone on the panel has said that today, but some of the common reactions that you can expect, it really, again, it differs based on their developmental level, the level of exposure to the trauma, how that parent or that caregiver in their life responded to the disclosure of the trauma. So don't expect the same reaction, but you can expect some things to be very consistent. And we can go to the next slide. The emotional responses, right? So just expect that the emotional responses can be unpredictable. It does not mean that they have to be explosive. It does not mean that they have to be angry or oppositional. We might see a child whose emotional response to trauma is that they're extremely withdrawn. They're very depressed, that there's a lot of sadness and avoidance, that they avoid going to school. But the key point for our community is that if you see a child that has an emotional or a behavioral change, that means something's going on. So if you have a child that is typically outgoing, happy, engages in a lot of activities, and all of a sudden that child is now withdrawn and spending all their time in their bedroom, you need to get involved. You need to start asking questions of what's going on in that child's life that you're seeing this. We also see, if you have a child where you see a significant change in their interpersonal relationships, right? A child that had a friend group that was engaged in their friend group, and all of a sudden there's a shift. Or the opposite, that you have a child who really wasn't engaging with friends, that they just were more of an introvert, that they enjoyed spending time alone or with a select few, and all of a sudden that child is now wanting to be out at all hours of the day and night, significant changes, then you have to start asking questions. And then finally, I think one of the most important pieces is that, a change, as I mentioned. Sometimes it's hard to check those kind of emotional changes. Children and teens, they can hide those changes, right? As a parent, I know I'm probably the last person to know when my child's feeling sad or happy, unless they come and decide they're going to tell me. It can be really challenging, but the one thing that children have a hard time hiding is their behavior. It's out there for you. So if you see a change in the behavior, sleep eating patterns, that all of a sudden the child is eating more or not eating anymore, or they're sleeping more, or they're awake all night when they typically were a good sleeper, that's something that you really want to make sure that you're in tune, that you're engaged with. And also help the community, help your friends who have teens, help your neighbors who have teens, understand that behavioral changes, yes, there's the typical teen years and they are expected to go through changes, but significant and radical changes, that's not typical teen behavior. That really, those are things that somebody may need to reach out to a counselor at school, to a professional on this panel, and we can help you if you're seeing that in any of the children in your lives.
Thank you. Shanika, give us a couple of minutes about what you're seeing, and then we'll go for the final round with everybody with solutions. Go ahead, Shanika.
I would say, so I have overlapping issues. As a nurse, what I see, and I would say this really boldly. So most times our trainings, when it comes to human trafficking, domestic violence, or being trauma-informed care, is acquired over a computer. And you click and you answer questions and you submit and you obtain your CEU without any interpersonal relationships, and taking that back to the workplace and being able to put that into your everyday work practices. And so as a trainer, I'm training social workers, police officers, and all of these professional people in what it is to be trauma informed and what it is to look for a survivor. But in the stresses of their own career, do they always use that same training? And so what I see when I'm dealing with my nonprofit, because I work closely, like I'm at grassroots in the trenches with the survivors, beyond 9 to 5. I see, and I'm gonna ask this question. This is the question that I just want everybody to think of. Imagine the thing that happened to you is now being used against you. Just imagine that the very thing that happened to you is now being used against you because of the way that you react to it. May it be racism. It happened to you. You were born whatever race you are, but now that thing is being used against you. May it be your sexuality. Some people say they were born gay, they were born bi, they were born whatever they were, but now that very thing is now your label, and now it's being used against you. Your reaction to whatever your trauma is, the reaction, the way you act, the way you behave, the way you adapt is now being used against you. And so that is what I see. I see that for the most part, that we are relabeling our victims and survivors because their behaviors. And so who is to help them understand that they don't have to fight anymore? Who is to help them understand that they don't have to run anymore? Who is to help them understand that they can move forward in life? And I say that because when you have a kid, you see these behaviors, and most times their insurance is covered. And most times they have a supportive team. They see it at school. They can get counseling at school. They have a community that can see if they open their eyes. And I'll say it like that because most times our children still fall through the cracks. But then we have adult women, 40 years old, have had children, and you see this behavior and everybody's like, no, she doesn't get to act like that. And so now that person is no longer our victim. She is now arrested. She is now unemployed. She is now labeled. She is now a repeat visitor to our behavioral health hospitals. And so I say that because if we are to be the help, then we need to help. We need to establish a community that really have the resources. And we don't get to pick and choose if it falls within our grant. I'm so over the term they fell through the cracks because all of us on this line do spring cleaning. And if you very busy, I have 9 kids, I'm very busy. And even in my car, I would go to the car wash and vacuum out the cracks. So when do we go down to the cracks and help the people that continuously fall through the cracks because we don't understand their trauma? When will we? When I think about the re-traumatization, and I think part of me being a trainer is to say to service providers, while you want to be very much so trauma informed, there are some things that you will have to do and say that will trigger your survivors. It's in the manner that you did not do it intentionally without any empathy. I want you to remember that. I want you all to really remember that, because sometimes we want to be so politically correct that we're still wrong. we can't be so politically correct and know what to say at all times that we're still wrong. If you treat the person with dignity, then you might be able to get the answer to the question that everybody said, don't ask that question because you'll trigger them. But if you're going to be the helping source, then I will give you the answer. So what I'm seeing is we're responding, we're reacting to the people. We haven't built, as service providers, we haven't built a real system of providing services. We are reacting based on how the survivors act. We're in a reactive mode, but we're supposed to be the ones who got it together. And so we have to go do better. We have to really have this training and have it for real. We really need to have the conversation because most of our service providers are re-traumatizing, and not because they think they're not, and not because they're walking on eggshells. It's because most times we are mirroring the thing that we're supposed to be helping them from. Our services. Yvonne said it. If now your survivor is just a number to you and just a dollar amount to you, you are exploitive. And that's re-traumatizing. And so I will run and hide from you. I will run from your services. And if we have survivors saying, I would rather stay out here than be hurt again, to be told a lie again, for a promise to be broken to me again, for the person who said that they would show up to not show up again. And so everything around trauma and how we deal with trauma for most of our survivors, I want us all to go from this day, go and today, after today, take your ACE score, take your ACE survey, go back to your own childhood traumas, and then we're gonna move forward after this day. But I challenge everyone on this line to take an ACE survey. For you all who are service providers, you probably know what it is, but Google it and answer the questions and be real with yourself first. That we're always in a helping mode, but we don't look at ourselves sometimes. And I thank you. That's what I would say.
Just a moment to recognize how much we're all thinking right now. Shanika, thank you for your leadership. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Solutions, the best part, we never, ever leave anybody just scared and unprepared. What are some solutions, Makisha? You've already given us some. Sharing your story, making awareness, having people see. Please share.
Well, I think in my line of work, the biggest problem that I see right now is the initial response, which is normally police officers, and the person that's outcrying not being believed, and what they are being told, having it criticized and questioned, and like, well, how did that happen if this happened, rather than just taking in the story. And I think that that does a lot to re-traumatize the person to where the next time maybe they don't call the police. Like I was watching a body cam recently, and the officer, he was an older man, the officer, and he kept asking her, why don't you get a divorce? He must have said it to her 10 times. And he even asked her, what do you want me to do here? And she called him and told him, my husband punched me in the head. And then he ran away, and I ran to the neighbor's house. And that was his response repeatedly, over and over. And so I think having our frontline people like officers really understand this trauma and understand the trauma that they're inflicting by their responses. Because without that, we're going to lose them the next time. I bet you money she's never going to call the police again, because she didn't get help and she wasn't believed, and she was told you need to file for a divorce, which she wasn't ready to do. So I think that it's important, and to Shanika's trigger point, what she had said about that. You know, that's one of the main reasons that I titled my book, But Why Did You Stay? Because people would ask me, well, why didn't you just leave? And not understanding that just the mere asking of that question was putting the blame back on me. Like, why didn't I do something, rather than why did he beat you up and hold a gun to your head? So I just think it's important to have everyone really understand the impact of what they say in a critical moment, especially police officers responding to a scene.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yvonne.
Yes, in terms of solutions, I think that we need to engage into the path to trauma-informed care. And what I mean by that is that we need to call for a change in organizational culture. We need to look at our organizations and see where we are when it comes to trauma-informed training. And we need to really take a look at that and understand that we need to respond to that depending upon the level at the appropriate rate. So we need to also utilize a trauma-informed approach that realizes the direct impact that trauma has on the access to services, which is the biggest issue that we're discussing today, is access to services. And we can, as we talk about all of these different things, we can't lose track of the fact that access to service is the important thing. As Shanika mentioned, we need to make sure that we're connecting our survivors to what they really need, not to what we think that they need, but to what they really do need. So how does an organization become more trauma-informed? Well, there are a few steps that can be taken. And like I said before, briefly, prioritizing organizational culture change. And what does that look like? That looks taking a look at the processes that we have in place and seeing how we can make those processes be more client-centered instead of just responding to other things. Incorporating client voices. That's why it's very important for us to have focus groups, to have listening groups, to have surveys, to really look at, acquiring, getting information from the survivors that are utilizing our processes so that we can incorporate their voices in our processes. Training staff and reviewing all the operating practices, policies, procedures to make sure that our workforce is trauma-informed. And this, by the way, requires an ongoing effort. Sometimes this doesn't mean that we do a training once a year and that, hey, check off, we checked trauma-informed off. This means that this is an ongoing process. I can tell you that from my perspective, from the job that I do, it's a huge challenge because we have a very robust operation, and we have a lot of positions coming in and a lot of mobility when it comes to hiring, and so the biggest challenge is to make sure that all of those employees are being trauma-informed trained, and that they remain true to the philosophy of trauma-informed. So encouraging also self-care for the staff, because remember, we haven't talked about staff, but I like to insert that in here. Our staff members may very well suffer from secondary trauma, because I can tell you from my own experience, I definitely have suffered more and less at times from the experiences that I am exposed to by talking to the clients and looking at their suffering. So we need to always, as we talk about trauma-informed care, we need to remember the employees. Like, for example, something as simple as we recently last year implemented a peer support group where we meet and we talk about, we use humor sometimes, we use whatever may fit the situation to make sure that our employees have an avenue to talk about their feelings and to talk about their emotions and the impact that trauma that they're seeing on a daily basis is having on their lives, because that's real. So there are different steps that we can take to really simple changes that we can make, that they do make a big difference, and they're easily passed on to the staff. For example, changing the way that we ask questions. I mean, I could give you many, many examples. I just put one in here so that we can talk about that one. Historically, traditionally, we would say, so what is wrong this morning? What can I do to help you? Well, changing that to what happened to you that brought you here today? Instead of approaching, as it was mentioned before, I think by Shanika and Mekisha both, what happened to her is not her fault. So why are we talking about what's wrong with you? We need to be talking what happened, who did something to you that brought you here. So changing the approach, changing how we're asking those questions. So now also explaining what we're doing. Many of us have processes that require paperwork, questionnaires. And for example, if you're gonna get a protective order, which we do here at the Coordinated Victims Assistance Center, that requires a lot of information. We need to find out a lot of things that may feel uncomfortable to the survivor at any given time. So it's just like when we go to the dentist or when we go to any place, guys, it's human behavior. We wanna know what's ahead. We wanna know what it's gonna look like. Because if we don't know, we're gonna get upset, we're gonna get nervous, we're gonna fear the process. And if we fear the process, we might not show up, as simple as that. So we need to explain what we're doing to our clients and why we're doing it. So it's not only, okay, so do you have any bruises that I can take a picture of? No, that's not good enough. We need to say, do you have, is there anything that I need to take a photograph of to help you? Have you taken pictures? Because this is gonna help you when you go to court. So you gotta take that extra conversation. You gotta give it that extra compassion and let her know, let him know, why is it that you're doing what you're doing? Often our victims, our survivors, they ask, can a friend of mine come with me? And I know that from an operational standpoint, it's easier to say, no, we don't accept anyone to come in with you. And I know why. Traditionally, we don't want anybody else in that interview because we know that sometimes family and friends may interject. And they may, be uncomfortable. We'd rather speak to the victim. But guess what? Sometimes just having your best friend hold your hand or having your sister be there with you and giving you a straight eye contact and giving you that sense of, hey, I'm here with you. You are not alone. I'm here to support you. Something as simple as that may make a big difference. So, when we're dealing or working with our clients, let's ask these questions. How can I make this conversation easier? Is this room okay? Are you cold? Do you need a glass of water? Do you have children that you need to go pick up? And at what time is that? We need to really create an environment that is not going to mimic any behavior that she was exposed to by the abuser, because otherwise we are going to re-traumatize them. And remember, when we talk about re-traumatization, we're talking about creating an environment or a situation that resembles, whether it resembles literally or symbolically, but it resembles the initial trauma that that individual suffered. And it could very well be just speaking in a tone of voice that is authoritarian. Or it could be as simple as not giving that survivor the opportunity to have a say-so, to have a voice, because that's what she's used to. She's used to being told what to do, how to think, what to wear. Now she comes into our operations and we're again trying to tell her what to do, how to do it, when is the best time to do it, so on and so forth. So that interaction right there could resemble to her, could be very symbolic, because it's not at home, it's not with the perpetrator, but it could be symbolic of the initial trauma that she experienced, what brought her to us to begin with. So that's why in terms of solutions, Myra, we need to talk our operations constantly, not once a year. We need to constantly examine what we're doing. How can we do it better? And be humble enough to recognize that our operations are not perfect and that we need to readjust them constantly if we really want to make an impact on the life of those who we serve, which is the bottom line.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Yvonne and Shanika said so much, but I think that linking our survivors to services, we're really lucky in Miami-Dade. We do have a number of service providers. We need more, right? Always need more, but we're very lucky that we do. But linking them to a service provider is not just handing a phone number or a piece of paper. We have to walk our survivors and be there to support them through the process. and to make sure that somebody is there driving them, taking them, and then making sure, is this a good fit? Do you feel okay? Will this work for you? And if not, well, guess what? We start over and we find something else so that our survivors are empowered and they feel as though we have their voice. I think one thing that we haven't touched on in terms of what I would like to see is that we do have to streamline as service providers our processes so that we stop asking our survivors to have to retell their stories every time that they have a new service provider, every time they are introduced, whether it's another law enforcement professional or another individual, especially those that are just starting their process of healing. We have to find ways to stop doing that. So, and again, what that solution is and what that looks like, it really does take a collaborative. I just think finally, the last thing I'd like to say is for the community, everyone can do something. And we see this in child welfare all the time. We have folks who say, well, I want to help. I want to help foster children, but I can't foster. My house isn't conducive to that. The environment I live in isn't conducive to that. But you could do something. You could do something to help. And it doesn't have to be money. Can you transport a mom who is struggling to get her daughter to doctor's appointments because she doesn't have transportation and the bus takes 4 hours? Can you provide transportation? In Yvonne's example, we have a mom that's struggling to feed her family. Can you provide meals 1 day a week to that mom? There's something that everyone in the community can do. And we just all have to, as service providers, be willing to say, this is how you become involved. We have to make those processes easier for folks so that you can support the children and the families that are victims of trauma and are trafficking survivors.
It's been our longtime theme, what you should know, what you can do. There's always something we can do, and that's why we gather here together in the Women's Fund Central Plaza. You're all so amazing. Shanika, tell us what to do.
So I would start with, no matter what the issues is, remember we're dealing with humans and humans have rights. I've seen advocates advocate for pets more than they advocate for a human based on whatever biases they have on themselves. And then the two questions that keep sticking out to me, why did you stay and why did you go back? And if you can imagine, why did someone stay? Why the very thing that we thought was so bad that they should have left, why did they stay? And then we need to identify what were they going to. And so I can remember being trafficked from the age of 11 to 18, but not knowing where the resources were, where was I going from this home that this man provided to this safe place. I'm not no longer on the streets as a homeless kid. Where are our services? We need to know that they stayed because they were numb. They stayed because I didn't know where else to go. I stayed because this felt normal to me. Why did they go back? I remember thinking I was out, thinking I was running away and having to go back because I knew nowhere else to go and it had gotten dark. And so when I say, what can we do? I want to talk about micro. We start with ourselves. Look at your own biases, use the service providers. We don't get to show up with an attitude. We don't get to show up bringing our own issues into work. Every morning, sit in your car and leave it in your car. We have families. We all have issues. We all have trauma. But when you walk into your job, know that the hurting person needs your help. The person that's showing up needs your help. So I want us to first start with ourselves. Deal with your own biases. Deal with your own traumas. Deal with your own perspective of why. I have a friend, her name is Jessica Laguerre, and she said, I is not the standard. And what that means is, don't say, like, even as a survivor, I have about 25 women that I work closely with. I never tell them that I am the standard. Oh, I'm a nurse, so you should be a nurse. I made it out, so you should be doing better. I am not the standard of what my expectations are of them. And so if you come into work thinking that what your organization standard is, then you lost already. We're not the standard of their process and their healing journey, right? And so let's talk about macro. Let's think huge. We have to think about our systemic issues. Home base is the most precious system that we have, and it's broken. Most homes are broken. And so as people who have influence, we have to go back to identify how we strengthen families, and holding people accountable. Don't play political games. If you know an organization is not doing what they say they would do, hold them accountable. That's our responsibility, because we have the voice, we have the influence, and we know that the person coming in, it's easier for organizations to say something didn't work and put the blame on the survivor. Oh, the service didn't work because it was the survivor. These people, and I hear it all the time, these people are so unpredictable, they're so unstable, but nobody evaluates the organization and where you failed. And so as a macro movement, we have to be that standard, set the standard amongst us, not towards the survivors. Allow people to, and hold people accountable to do what they say that they're gonna do. If their organization websites say it, then hold them accountable. Survivors should not be calling organizations and being told that, oh, we're not doing that right now. Then we need to not do it. We can't continue to say that we're doing it, because when we're running, most times when I'm doing outreach, it hurts. The only thing I can do is give the information. Sometimes they're not ready, but sometimes we're not ready. We don't have what we need to have in place for them. And so it's better for me to leave them out there until we're ready than to make them leave. And then they have to go back. Because going back, I remember I was the bottom girl. I was the recruiter. I fought him. I left. I didn't know where I was going. And that night I had to go back. Going back was the worst day. Going back was the worst day I lived. Not only was I beaten, my quota was raised. No, I was not able to go and work in the fancy with the fancy clientele. He put me back out on the streets. And so as a macro movement, we need to make sure that we are ready, because we know the numbers. We know the numbers of victims. We know the numbers of survivors, and we need to be ready. And so micro, you first, macro, us. And so that's what I'll say. That's how that's what we can do. Donate your clothes, donate the things that you need, donate to an organization that you believe in. Stand behind an organization, no matter how small they are, no matter how big they are. Donate. We all have nice clothes. And so that's what I would say.
A lot of people
Thank
listening, a lot of people able to hear you. Thank you so much, Shanika. You're just amazing. Thank you for your time here. We are going to ask you, Lujane, to join us now for the Q&A portion. We're going to ask everybody to do the next poll. We're going to ask all of you to please remember that we're building a stronger community. Every single connection that we make, we have a stronger fabric of our community. So share with each other, please, in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question. Our beautiful, amazing Carolina Garcia, who many of you know, Caro, is asking what kind of events can cause trauma. So most people think that trauma is only the result of really extreme events. Is that truly the case? Who would like to take that? Shanique, I see you first.
I was actually gonna tell Dr. G, but
Okay,
I think
both.
Yeah, go. So I'll say I think anything can be traumatic. There are some people who have gotten into a car accident and refuse to drive again. There's some people who've gotten burglarized and you see their reaction every time. And I think it's how you deal with a circumstance, a death. We usually think we can prepare if our grandma's really, really sick, but in the moment, there's this activity Maria Clara did with the police department where you get to group off, you get to kind of choose which trauma you want to embrace, but trauma doesn't happen. The very thing, I would say the very thing that, there are some very extreme traumatic things, but the very thing that could happen to anyone could change how you deal with it depending on what time of day it happens, what season it happens. And I would say, we knew that a lot of people had COVID, but if that was the day that you just got fired, on top of the day your car got rerolled on top, that thing can take you completely out of there. And so we didn't say this enough, even with trauma, I would say, check on your mental health status. Check on your mental health status. Thank you.
If there's nobody else, we have another question about the danger of leaving. So one thing is the neural pathways and the difficulties in leaving, but we haven't really touched on how dangerous it can be to leave and how important it is to have a plan. Yvonne, should we call on you for that question?
Yes, absolutely. I think that it is very important for everyone to understand that it is precisely when a victim of domestic violence decides to leave, that period of time that follows that decision is the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence. And I think that that is the key that we need to keep in mind, because otherwise we're going to turn to judge survivors that are not able to leave, failing to understand that leaving is in fact the most dangerous thing that they could do in many instances. So I think that, yes, when we're assisting victims of domestic violence, we need to make sure that we have a safety plan in place. There are a lot of different safety plans in place, but I want to emphasize the fact that a safety plan is not necessarily a one-time document that we complete with the client. Safety planning, it's part of the case at all times. Every single time, like for example, with the operations of the shelter, CVAC, every time that we meet with a client, that meeting has a safety plan attached to it. Every step that the victim takes requires an update in the safety plan, because the situations change. And when the situations change, so should change the safety plan. So the safety plan is a live document that has to accompany the trajectory of this individual as she or he tries to get away from the abuse. Very important, makes a big difference in the level of danger that the victim will face when escaping the abuse.
Makisha, we only have a couple more minutes, but is there anything that you want to add to that?
I would just say that, it takes a lot for someone to finally say that I'm going to leave. And so when that happens, when they break that silence and when they seek out help from a resource, that is the most scariest thing they've been through. That's scarier than, having a knife or a gun held to your head, or being beat while you're pregnant, being told you're going to get drowned in a bathtub. I mean, it's just scarier than all of that. And it's hard for normal people to understand that just the act of coming forward and saying these things out loud is scarier than anything else. And so I just think it's so important that, we come to that situation with an understanding and accepting mind, and listen to what they say so that we can figure out how to best help that person.
I am going to listen to this once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times, because there's so much wisdom here and real live communication. It is impossible for me to express the gratitude that I'm feeling in all the comments and the people who are pinging me back and forth for how human this exchange of some science, some reality check, some protocol has been people, we only have 1 minute left, less than a minute. Policy needs to be affected, and it will be affected by these stories and the science. Investment has to be affected. The way that we treat people who've been through trauma, as our board chair, Gloria Romero Roses, added there, our amazing state attorney, Catherine Fernandez Rundle, and her amazing team are working with that, with us and with many of us. Please, if you want to know more, if you want to be able to do more, this is a very organic organization. You can volunteer, you can be part of our impact agents, which really means that we come together, we find things that we can do together because we are stronger together. Please communicate with one another. Please do the survey because we have to measure some things so we can show some people the numbers, because we all know the humanity and the stories behind it. So that's really important. We meet here the first Thursday of every month. We're going to be talking about economic mobility, but not just any economic mobility, sources and resources that exist here, working with organizations like the Miami Foundation and others, because there are people there to help you find a job, to get a babysitter, to be able to get empowered. So sometimes it's about trauma, but often it's about the other things. Like you said, Shanika, often you're not even thinking that you're victimized. You're thinking, I need food, I need a job, I need a place to have my kids. There are amazing resources here, and we share and we get those ties that bind together. So thank you so much for being here. This is your Women's Fund. We are not kidding. Keep on collaborating, stay connected, and we'll see you on November 4th, we hope. Oh my goodness, panelists, you're so amazing. Thank you for everybody for showing up. Unmute yourselves. Let's be human for a minute before we say goodbye. I really don't want to say goodbye.
This is fantastic. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes,
Everyone
thank you.
here has said such powerful words. I was in awe the whole time. Shanika, I can't. Every time I talk to you, I'm like, wow.
Okay.
I always
Listen,
learn so
they're
much.
telling me that what we're talking is being heard.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's
Oh.
supposed to be. And it's supposed to be. It's our
Okay.
central plaza. And I wish we could have everybody here talking, and we have too many people actually in the audience. We'd all be, we wouldn't hear each other, but you all out there are amazing. I mean, Maria Clara, everybody, all these board members, amazing people. We're all together. You know, I always say that when you're under duress, one is under duress because we'll all come under duress. We'll all be traumatized for something, like you were saying, Shanika. So sometimes, like, how do you find that number? What do you do? Well, we do have resources on the website, and we can get people to, you know, Yvonne, for example, what you should know, what you can do cards, right? But worst case scenario, there's 911 and there's 211, depending what people are comfortable calling. There's always something you can do, right? Always something you can do. Yvonne, we're so happy that the county budget is supporting more services.
Absolutely, me too.
Still need more though, right?
Always
Never
more.
enough.
Always
But we need to
never
stop
enough.
to be grateful for what we got,
Yes.
embrace it, you know, then celebrate it, and then we move forward to the next ask. Because otherwise, we always live in a space of unsatisfaction, and that's not good.
That's true. Well, we started this year, we're starting to beef up our own self-education. And we started learning with some of our great leaders on our board, and we've got an advocacy committee, and Vicky Lopez did a training, like a 101, how to speak up, how to advocate, because the county and the city, they work for us. And so one of the things that we did is we went and spoke, and we said, we care about these services and we want to support them. And it seemed to really help. So we're going to just keep on growing and flexing those muscles, creating our own neural pathways of yes, we can, right? I love the positivity of Vijay, that you were saying, that things can be rebuilt, right? That we can all take it and we can all keep on learning and get stronger. Makisha, you feel so close. You've got a new family in Florida.
Well, then I can't wait to visit.
Definitely. We'll take you
Ladies,
Beaches are
around and show
definitely
you.
better than Galveston. Galveston
Yeah.
water is.
ladies, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be part.
Same
You're all
here.
fantastic teamwork, and I'm so sorry that I do have to run. I have another meeting.
to-
Thank you.
Me
You
too.
do the real thing. Take care of people.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a
Bye-bye.
wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day,
Nice to meet
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you, Vivi.